So I was doing contract work for the Marine Biological Association back in 2019. Just temporary stuff, monitoring tide pools along the Aberdeenshire coast, logging salinity levels, photographing invasive species. The kind of solitary work you do when you're trying to save money and don't mind being paid peanuts to stand in freezing water for 12 hours. They'd assigned me to this remote station at the base of these sheer cliffs, Cully Bay, though the locals called it something else I couldn't pronounce. The nearest village was 6 miles inland, connected only by a single-track road that flooded twice a day at high tide. I was staying in this converted bothy, basically a stone shed with a propane stove and a ham radio that only worked when the weather was perfect. The first 3 days were textbook. I'd hike down to the tidal zone at dawn, set up my equipment, and document the pools as they drained. The rock formations there were ancient. Basalt columns twisted into these impossible geometries by volcanic pressure. The pools themselves were deep, some of them 15 feet across, with water so clear you could see every barnacle and urchin on the bottom. But on the 4th morning, I started hearing my name. I was alone, absolutely alone. The tide was out, the access road was underwater, and the bothy was the only structure for miles. I was kneeling by pool 7, taking samples, when I heard it. Clear as a bell, someone said, "Thomas," from somewhere behind me. I assumed it was the wind through the rock formations, even though there was no wind. The air was dead still, that heavy kind of stillness that makes your ears pop. I turned around, nothing but the cliffs and the shingle beach. I went back to work. 5 minutes later, it happened again. "Thomas?" But this time it sounded like my mother, her exact cadence, the way she'd say my name when I was a kid, and she was checking if I was still awake. She'd been dead for 3 years. I stood up and called out, asked if anyone was there. The sound bounced off the cliffs and came back wrong, like the echo was a few seconds too late and deeper than it should have been. That night, I reviewed my audio logs. I'd been recording ambient sound for a study on crustacean behavior. At 14:33, exactly when I'd heard my name, there was nothing on the tape but the static of the hydrophones. No voice, no wind, just this low-frequency hum that made my headphones buzz against my skull. The next day, I decided to investigate the caves at the far end of the bay. They were only accessible at extreme low tide, and even then, you had to squeeze through a gap in the rocks that was barely shoulder width. I'd been avoiding them because the charts marked them as unstable, but I figured if someone was squatting there or playing pranks, that's where they'd be. I squeezed through at around 3 p.m. The cave opened up into this cathedral-like chamber, maybe 40 feet across, with a pool of black water in the center. The rock walls were covered in these strange formations, not stalactites, but these twisted, fibrous growths that looked almost like roots, even though we were nowhere near any vegetation. They glistened with a clear, viscous fluid that smelled like ozone and rotting fish. That's when I saw the reflection. In the pool, I saw myself standing, but I wasn't standing. I was crouching by the edge, looking down. The reflection showed me upright, facing the cave entrance, waving slowly with my right hand. I don't wave with my right hand. I'm left-handed. I looked up from the water. There was nothing there. I looked back down. The reflection was still there, still waving, but slower now. And then it stopped waving and pointed at me. I scrambled back so fast, I scraped my back against the rock. When I got out into the open air, I checked my phone. No signal, obviously. And when I looked back at the cave entrance, I saw something emerging from the darkness. It was shaped like a person, but wrong. Too tall, maybe 7 feet, and the limbs were proportioned incorrectly. The arms hung down to the knees, and the legs bent backward at the knee like a dog's. The skin was pale and wet, like it had been soaked for weeks, and it moved with this horrible fluidity, not walking but gliding across the rocks, leaving that same viscous trail I'd seen in the cave. But the face, God, the face. It didn't have one. Just this smooth, featureless expanse of flesh where features should be, like a mannequin that had been melted and stretched. And as it moved toward me, it started making sounds. Not words exactly, but imitations of words. It was trying to speak with my voice, I realized. I could hear my own vocal timbre in the sounds, but garbled, like a recording played underwater through a broken speaker. "Thomas," it gurgled. "Stay. Help. Stay." I ran. I left all my equipment, thousands of pounds of sensors and cameras and sampling gear, just left it there on the rocks. I sprinted back to the bothy, but the tide was coming in fast, cutting off the return path. I had to climb. I scaled the cliff face using these old, rusted pitons that had been hammered in decades ago for seabird researchers, my fingers bleeding, not daring to look down because I could hear it at the base of the cliff, making these wet, clicking sounds, still calling my name in that broken parody of my mother's voice. I reached the top and collapsed on the grass. When I finally looked down, the beach was empty. The tide had come in, covering the rocks, and everything was perfectly normal, perfectly silent. I radioed for pickup that night, told them I was sick, told them I'd fallen and needed medical attention. I didn't care about the lie, I just needed to get off that coastline. They found my equipment 3 days later when the weather cleared. Everything was there, perfectly arranged in neat rows, as if I'd spent hours carefully packing it away. But the data cards were all corrupted, and in every single photo, every single one, there's this blur, this smudge of white in the corner of the frame, getting closer in each successive shot. In the last photo, the one I don't remember taking, the smudge is right behind my shoulder. And if you enhance it, if you really zoom in, you can see the suggestion of fingers, long, wet fingers reaching out toward my neck. I moved to Birmingham after that, took a desk job. I don't go near the coast anymore, don't swim in the ocean, don't even like taking baths. Because sometimes, when the pipes settle in my flat at night, I hear it. That wet clicking. And my name, whispered through the drain. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know if it was hungry or lonely or just curious. But I know this. Some things live in the spaces between the tides, in the dark water where the light doesn't reach.